Welcome back to the Queer Circle, where queer healers step up to the mic to share their journeys and what they tell their younger selves. Today we have Patrick Walden. Patrick is a white, trans, queer survivor and practicing psychotherapist in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He is committed to anti-racism, feminism, and the idea that men can have feelings. He has a bachelor's in child development and a master's in clinical social work, as well as has attended a graduate level AmeriCorps program. Welcome to the Queer Circle, Patrick.
So I grew up with a working class childhood. My mom was in nursing school at the time that she was pregnant with me. And so the story is that she had me induced so she could take her nursing final. Um, and there are two things I really attribute to this origin story. I'm not great with mornings to this day, and I have a really great work ethic. My mom's love showed up in a lot of ways, some of which harmed me, but this story actually makes me really proud to come from her. She really took care of things. My mother grew up in the projects in Hartford, Connecticut, in a poor home with an alcoholic father and with domestic abuse. And my Nana, my mom's mom, worked hard her entire career. She got a job at the Hartford Insurance Company, really through all of it. And, there's a story too about my mom. She sort of looked around at her situation in poverty and with everything going on. She's really proud to tell this story of being 14 years old, realizing, okay, I need a job. And she looked for the building in Hartford that looked really the richest. And so there was the state capitol building, which had a gold ceiling on top of it from the outside. And my mom walked in there one day and said, "Hello, I need a job." And the receptionist ladies working there just sort of like huddled up and looked at this kid and was like, "Okay, we're gonna give this kid a job." So for me, I'm really proud to come from a lineage of strong women who took care of business, and I'm also learning how to embrace being a complex man. Some of my earliest realizations of knowing my difference, I went to three different elementary schools. And so every time I had the opportunity to make new friends, and at every opportunity, even when, like the cool kids wanted to hang out with me, I made the conscious choice to sort of reject that, like reject normalcy and hang out with the kids on the outskirts. And so that stands out to me in retrospect. I think, baby me was looking for a queer community. And then it became more blatantly obvious. My queerness became more blatantly obvious, when I started to hit puberty and had a raging crush on my best friend and would spend secret long hours on America Online. We had the, dial-up disc at the time, the free discs, and then eventually I convinced my parents to get the subscription, but I spent hours, quote unquote, pretending to be a boy. Um, and I did that all throughout my early adolescence, and that I was so blessed to have the internet because that really, I think, saved me then. There were all these chat rooms and just like the opportunity to curate my like profile or whatever it was called back then, and just really the opportunity to like be a 14-year-old boy and like flirt with girls on the internet, tale as old as time, really. So if I had to choose a hero in my life, it would be Reverend Lewis Mitchell. Lewis is a black trans man who actually just had his 60th birthday. And in my 20s, I became involved in a few different queer theater projects, which both of them really changed and shaped my life and offered me just such a rich sense of queer community unlike I'd ever experienced. And during one of these projects, I was one of the only two cigarette smokers at the time because most everyone else were like nerdy theater kids. And so, it's like one day in between practice or rehearsal, and it was raining, and I wanted to just sneak out for a cigarette. And I went out the side door because I didn't really want all these like theater kids to know I was smoking either. But I was. And so one day I got caught right outside a side doorway while it was raining, and I smoked a cigarette with Lewis. Um, and we got to talking. And I think he was really glad to find me out there too. So, by the time that we had finished talking, I told him about my father who had actually taken his life a year or so earlier. And his immediate response was, "Well, I can be your dad." And to be honest with you, I cycled through a lot of different emotions in a short period of time. One of which, frankly, I wanted to kind of punch him in the face. I wanted to say, "Who the hell do you think you are?" But luckily, after that came this tenderness and this openness, and just like, I don't know, I just feel like I was waiting for that. So I said, okay. Um, I later came to learn that I'm one of several of his adopted kin. Um, and I feel like I have a father figure now who I can call when I need advice or my temper gets me, or I need to be set back on the right path in some way. And those things that dads do. Um, and it's been a tremendous healing force to my life. So every day I wear this necklace that is a sword. Um, all through my 20s. Well, for a while, I went and worked on this LGBT unit at an inpatient hospital just because I was trying to find a way to transition while on the job. That wasn't going to be terrible for me. It ended up being really difficult in a lot of ways. One of the best things from working there was I met this amazing person who's one of my good friends who also happens to be a witch. And she was telling me all about it and these treatment teams and about how she reads tarot cards. And one day we're out at the river and there she is. I'm a non-believer at first, but she's reading my cards. I come to trust her very much. I come to trust the tarot very much. Only with my main witch, but so all through my 20s, I just kept getting the swords over and over and over again. And she was one of the friends that just really saw me through some hard 20s, honestly. So for me, and the sword means in the sword suit, she just kept saying, like, okay, well, there are two parts to this. It's pain, and then it's the wisdom that we gain from it. Um, and it makes a lot of sense for me now. So I wear this every day and I wear it to work every day, and just to kind of remind me about some of the darker places. So I would say that the dysphoria has been the hardest and the darkest for me. Just those moments of anguish with myself, getting home after a day of being misgendered, walking away after being called ma'am again, sitting with a girlfriend at dinner when the waiter calls us ladies. Those cumulative things, just the shame, the despair, and ultimately the loneliness that I felt around it. Especially when I was younger, just not really having a lot of people that I could talk to, and that luckily did get better as I got older. Um, but ultimately, at the time, just not really knowing anyone who had come before me yet as I walked this path, not, I had a trans elder at the time who was 3 years older than me. I was probably 22, he was probably 25, and he gave me this advice that someone a little bit older than him gave him that was about starting tea, about transitioning. I was really hesitant for a lot of reasons. And he said, well, if you can see the other side, you can get to the other side. And I hated that advice because I couldn't see the other side. I couldn't see a path for me. And that was like the scariest part. Um, but ultimately the most empowering part in retrospect to be able to forge my own path. As a 37-year-old trans man, I didn't even hear the word transgender until I got to college. Um, I had a big crush on a girl, and she was a cisgender woman. And I just knew that and we were part of this club by Laga, just to set the time. And I knew she was doing a training for Bilaga that night. And it was called, Trans 101. And I really didn't even give it two thoughts. I just knew my crush was giving the training. So I hurried home, back to the campus from my babysitting job, and got there a few minutes late and sat down. And the training like needed to happen. So it was like an awkward vibe. And I'm just looking at my crush. And so then it happened. She explained it. She said, okay, thanks for joining, everyone. Here's what transgender means. And when she explained it, I just had this moment. I felt like blood rush to my face, and my whole world just shrink around me. And I just remember thinking to myself, oh, fuck, this is gonna be hard. Um, I ended up dating her, and she had given this talk. And so I'm thinking, like, oh, and she dated this trans guy before. I'm thinking, she's gonna like crush on her, think she's hot, think she's beautiful, think she's smart, all these things. And I think she's ultimately gonna be supportive of me. And I think that was part of the appeal. But it ended up not going well at all. And I got right back to that despair, and it really went on for quite some time. There's a whole bunch of hope at the onset of dating her, but I started to say things to her at the time like, hey, when we are intimate with each other, like I really don't identify with like having breasts. And she would say responses like, don't say that. My ex, who was trans, used to say things like that, and you're not trans. I would, take some risks and try to do things like buy men's clothing or men's underwear, things like that. And she really just made me feel really, really badly about that. Right after we broke up, I still didn't have that much money in my life, but I went right to Walmart and I bought every clothing item that I wanted. I cut my hair, and it was my first big heartbreak, but it was also my first, like, I'm gonna do everything that you told me not to do, and from that moment, I started looking like myself really for the first time ever. And it turned out at the end of the day, I just needed my own permission, which was a pretty cool lesson to learn. So my 20s were hard, and then my 29th year was really just like almost like the grand finale. I think the queers call it the Saturn returns. I've learned about it since. So I was with somebody, my partner at the time, for most of my 20s. I did begin transition while we were together, and our relationship ultimately fell apart. by the end of my 20s. So my 29th year was a great challenge. In October of that year, my relationship ended, and I was alone in this house that we bought together, really just like living out of like a bedroom and a living room and trying to like figure out what to do next. And a few months later, my father actually took his life. Um, so, and I had just sort of come out of the oven cooked as a brand new man. And it really took me a while. This was around the time of YouTube, watching people transition on YouTube, like Cadence, 3 months on T, he's got the full beard. For me, it took me really over a year to start passing as male in the world, and that was around the same time. So my long-term relationship ends. My dad suddenly dies in this tragic way, and there I am as like this brand new man at 29. Just the year before, I was a 28-year-old woman with a partner and a father. Um, so the grief about it all um, just felt so immense, including I have come to later understand like the grief of myself. And it just came. And it felt like for a while that there was just really no ground floor for me. And so for a few years, I lost myself in a lot of sex, I smoked a lot of weed, a lot of weed. And eventually sat down with my broken self one evening in that backyard alone, and I wrote out probably the most important to-do list of my life. So it said things like pay that stack of bills, um, sell my house, and start a private practice. And eventually I got through it all. Yeah, in terms of finding peace, when I think back on it, it's always been I've always felt the most peaceful, happy, and at home being around other trans people. Um, it's just shown me the most true peace and acceptance of myself. What better than a mirror to see yourself in? Um, those moments came in an F to M, the East Coast F to M camp out that I decided to go to on a whim when I was in my early 20s. I met people there I'm still friends with 10 plus years later. Just walks in the wood with my best friend, talking and not talking, and just keeping pace with each other through this journey has been wonderful to have. And now it's being with other trans people, but it's also being there for my clients, especially my younger than me trans clients. At 37, I'm the elder now, which is pretty wild, but I've stepped into it. And now just seeing the importance of me taking up space across the room or across the screen from a younger trans person is a feeling I'm getting acquainted with, and I really take my role with reverence. Throughout my life and throughout my career, it's become clear to me that for me, trauma work is about showing someone love and care while teaching them how to show themselves love and care. Really, my people ask me sometimes, like, what is your therapeutic modality? My therapeutic modality is learning how to love each of my clients, like truly love each of my clients, because I think that is the most healing thing. I teach them how to be loved, and I teach them through modeling, sometimes how to love themselves. And I care for my clients, and I teach them that they're worthy of love and care, and how to in turn take care of themselves. losing my dad was hard for me. I've also lost others in my life before then. So I've known grief for a long time, and I've lost others since then. A lot of us in the queer community know grief pretty well. Um, Another big loss for me was Bryn Kelly's passing. Bryn was a hard loss for me and a lot of people because she was this hot, smart, witty, enigmatic trans woman who everyone just looked to. Um, she and I also had a fling that hard winter on my 29th year in between my separation from my partner and my dad's death. Um, and just after an inpatient hospital stay for her, she later told me about when we developed a friendship. But we spent that Christmas together so we both wouldn't have to be alone. And we were like two secret, like sort of grumpy queers who also like secretly loved Christmas, which we came out to each other about, and um, we just like she made me dinner, I made her a fire, and it is exactly what we needed at the time. And we later developed like a really special friendship. But the communal grief of such a strong and influential woman who was trans, though, was the biggest heartbreak of her loss. Suicide is a particular kind of grief, and I've known about it for a long time. My half brother took his life when I was 8, and I really struggled to figure out. I really struggled to figure out how to grieve my father. Um, I wrote like one journal entry the day after I was told the news, having been in like this manic induced grief state, just trying to write down every detail of what happened, like the next day in this bar alone. Um, and, and so I'm just like trying to figure out in the next year, like, how do I grieve my dad? Like, sitting alone again in this house, just like, you should grieve your dad, and so I did all these after the writing half a journal entry, I did all these like rituals to try to figure out like how to grieve because, like I just didn't know how. And it's like another time I'm outside my house and I tried tying a note to the balloon, but the balloon wouldn't fly. Um, and so that spring, that upcoming spring, it all, my 29th year just came to a head for me. And I ended up checking myself into an inpatient center. I actually was prescribed like 4 Klonopin a day from my psychiatrist, and I took all 4 of them every day. I got to a point where I wanted to be a little bit more present in my life. So, when I got to that point where my life just kind of lost all its luster, um, I didn't want to be alone. So I checked myself into the hospital, and while I was there, um, I made, they have like the arts and crafts room, and I made one of those model wooden ships, which I cleverly named the SSRI. Um, and so, anyway, that following summer, I still have the wooden ship. I had put it on my mantle, and I said, "It's time to gotta grieve your dad, right? Like you didn't do it right, like the time before with the balloon." So I took a day. I went out to nature. I spent hours like decorating this ship with flowers, adorning it, just like being intentional as hell about it. And so I think, okay, put all my like love and intention into this boat, and I set it off into the river, and immediately it just topples over. And I was just like, what the hell? And so I got real mad for a second, and then I laughed. And then I picked up the boat and I just chucked it as far as I could into the river. I was like, there you go, Dad. And I went home. It wasn't necessarily in this moment that I decided to specialize in grief, but in the coming years after, when I learned that grief swells up in you when it does, and we need to all deal with it in that way. but also that I wanted to create space for others. That's when I learned that this is something that I want to spend my life helping others with. I'm taking a poetry class right now, and one of the prompts was to ask yourself, how old are you? I'm 37. And then you're supposed to take each line of the page and number it 0 through however old you are. So for me, it's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way up to 37. So there are 38 lines. And the prompt is to go through every year of your life and write down what love meant to you at each year. So for example, age 8, I'm having my birthday party at the big carnival. Age 9, I'm at the same school all year. I have 2 best friends. Age 10, I'm teaching, and I said her full name, which I won't say here. I'm at a new school. It's 5th grade. And this other little girl is at this new school too, and she had just moved to this town in Connecticut from Syria, and she didn't know English. And so this was one of those moments that I chose to be her friend instead of like the sports girls who wanted me to play with them. And so I said, I'm teaching her English under the play structure during recess. I'll say that again. I'm teaching her English under the play structure during recess. Age 11. I'm getting teased every day in homeroom, and I learn how to self-soothe in the bathtub. Age 12. My science teacher sees something special in me. And on, and I just think that that's such a wonderful activity. I just think that's such a wonderful activity for any, especially queer person, to go back and do. It's a real, like, self-love activity. And something you can do to love yourself is to just, like, simply ask yourself the questions and give yourself time to answer. So I would say, like, my theoretical orientation is loving my clients, but I also like narrative therapy a lot, which works well for this podcast. It's all about telling your stories. I just feel like that's how we can heal, especially as queer people. There's so much power in telling our stories and in having someone listen, especially another queer person. And so one of the tools I use with my clients as I do, and you can do this on your own too, is 5-minute writing prompts. So they're timed 5 minutes. I actually set the timer for 4 minutes. And when 4 minutes have gone by, I'll tell my client, you can tell yourself, there's 1 minute left, or just know that just to finish up your thoughts. But I mean, the questions are things like, who am I? Or what am I struggling with or wanting to change? Or what am I afraid of? And if you ask yourself those questions sincerely and you give yourself literally 5 minutes to answer sincerely, these things can like change the course of your life. So that's pretty cool. I tell my younger self I was so proud of me for doing what I was to get by. For hours long walks alone in the woods at 10 with my important imagination, to my 14-year-old self for figuring out how to sneakily make that boy profile in America Online so I could imagine a 14-year-old boy me and so I could talk to girls. For 17-year-old depressed me who was smoking or drinking in the corner of a social event, not understanding why I felt so different and alone. And I would say, hold on, because community is coming and you're going to be so important.
Thanks for joining us in the Queer Circle today, Patrick. And thank you, listener, for joining us as well. If you'd like to learn more about Patrick's practice, you can contact him at patrickwaldenTherapy.com or visit us at queercirclepodcast.com, where you can find his bio and contact information. Music from today's episode was provided by Purple Fluorite. You can find Purple Fluorite's other works anywhere streaming is available: Spotify, iTunes, and beyond.